Okay. Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that was begun during the start of the pandemic to help bookstores whose doors were shuttered, authors whose tours were canceled, like me, and readers who just want to interact with authors. Today is really, really special because we are going to be talking about Dani Shapiro's first novel in 15 years, Signal Fires, and it's amazing, 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 amazing. I read this book in galleys, and I was so moved by it that I immediately had to email Dani and tell her this book is just, it's like ripping everything I thought I knew apart and putting it back together. This book was the most anticipated book from the LA Times, Time Magazine, Lit Hub, Book Page, Library Journal, The Million, She Reads, Oprah Daily, Vanity Fair, Bustle, Real Simple, just about everywhere. And the raves are just one upon another. Booklist said it's stunning in depth and in breadth, lyrical and propulsive, said Oprah Daily. Gorgeous, have your tissues ready, said Real Simple. And what I say is, like, this is the kind of book that you're going to be talking about and you want to give to other people. It's that gorgeous. So Dani Shapiro is a best-selling novelist, memoirist, and host of the podcast Family Secrets. She's the author of Slow Motion, Black and White, Inheritance, Hourglass, Still Writing, Devotion, Picturing the Wreck, and Family History. She's also the co-founder of the Siren Land Writers Conference, and she's also a wonderful friend who I don't get to see enough. So this is her first novel in 15 years. So welcome, Dani. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Caroline. It's so good to see you and to be with you and just to get to talk to you.
It's wonderful. So we were talking a little bit before we got on here, and I wanted to know, since this is your first book in over a decade, what propelled you into writing it, and how nervous, and why hadn't you written a novel before this one? Can you just tell us a little bit about the process and the inspiration?
Yeah, well, as many readers know, I made this long detour into memoir, right? So in the last decade, I certainly was writing books, but I wasn't writing fiction.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really kind of surprising to me that I kept on returning to memoir. I really had no idea why. And maybe 13, 14 years ago, I began this novel. I had the characters. I loved them. I knew them. I wrote about 100 pages of it. And I wrote my way right into a drawer. And the problem was, there are many ways into a novel, as you know. But I think probably one of them is not starting with structure. And I had a structure in mind. And the structure I had in mind was that I wanted to tell the story backward in time. And so I wrote this chunk of pages that took place on one night in the year 2010. And then I wrote another chunk of pages that took place on one night on the New Year's Eve, 1999, the Y2K New Year's Eve.
Right.
We all thought the world was going to end. And then I came to realize what an incredibly flawed structure I had come up with, because if you keep on moving backwards in time and your characters haven't been born yet, that's a problem. It's a problem. It's a big problem.
Right.
But I couldn't figure it out because I was so invested in this idea of telling the story backwards. And so I just couldn't find my way out of it. So I put it away, and I was heartbroken, and I didn't think I would ever return to it. And then I did, all those years later.
Does this spur you on to want to write another novel?
Oh yeah. I mean, it felt so, I'm proud of what I've done in nonfiction, and I don't know what will happen in terms of my writing memoir. But when I finished my last memoir, Inheritance, I really felt like I had completed a certain body of work. And, that really, from Slow Motion to Inheritance, it's like, it should be a boxed set. Like it's one story that is complete now. I was digging and excavating and searching for something, I didn't know what. And then And then I discovered that I had been the family secret all my life, and I wrote Inheritance, and I went on that journey. And I really felt like I was not finished with the form, but finished with that exploration, really of many years. And when I returned to the novel, when I returned to Signal Fires, I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't thinking, oh, it's the pandemic, I have a novel in a drawer, maybe I can, let's see what happens. Instead, I was cleaning out my office closet, like literally cleaning out that office closet right there. And behind all this other accumulated stuff was this paper manuscript. And I just sat down and reread it. Something said to me, just reread this and revisit this. And I did. And the thing that was so powerful for me was I realized, well, first of all, I liked the pages that I was rereading. And I don't know about you, but when I revisit older work, I always think I can improve it, or I'm
Oh yeah, that was one of my questions.
or it's not. And in this case, I reread these pages, and it was almost as if someone else had written them. And I thought, wow, I like this. It was so long. It had been so long since I had revisited them that it didn't feel like mine. So I could read it with kind of a cold eye in some way. And then the other thing that happened that was more powerful was I thought, I've written these two sections. Each takes place a decade apart. One night in 2010, one night in essentially the year 2000, and now it's 2020. And like my mind just sort of exploded, and I thought, who would these people have become? And that just completely allowed me to re-enter their story and to know how to structure it, because I realized that while I didn't want time to move in a chronological way, I could upend time, which I had been doing in my work anyway for years, and could create this prismatic kind of kaleidoscopic narrative in terms of time that might be really satisfying to read.
Before we go on, I want to say a little bit about the book. Signal Fires does indeed take place over one night in 3 lifetimes, and several lifetimes, starting in 1985 with a car crash that kills one young woman and changes the lives of one family and 3 teenagers. Nobody talks about it, but this accident also reverberates through time, impacting a new family, the Schenkmans, and their young son, Waldo, who's got to be the most amazing boy ever in literature. Young, lonely 9-year-old boy. And he befriends their son, Waldo. And as the past returns, everything changes again. So what I wanted to go back to that question of craft, because you had mentioned in an interview, I believe that, or maybe it's in the acknowledgement, that you said Jennifer Egan had told you that there is no chronology. Get rid of that idea, and that had opened you up. Isn't that also a scary idea? I mean, people seem to think, well, a story is this happened, and that happened, and that happened. But it doesn't have to be written that way, right?
Well, it's funny. Yes, that was in the acknowledgments. I thanked Jenny.
Right.
Because when I was putting the novel in the drawer and I was in a state of despair about it, I was driving along not far from my house in Connecticut, and I was on the phone with Jenny, and I was bemoaning the fate of my book, and I was telling her a little bit about it. And what she said was, you've already decided that you want to be experimental in the way that you're dealing with time. So why your idea is to tell this story backward in time chronologically? That's chronology. I mean, why stick to the chronological? And I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to do it. And I think in terms of craft, that next decade of my life, I mean, my memoir Hourglass is completely non-linear. I was fond of saying when I was on tour for that book that there is no plot, none whatsoever. I mean, it ends where it begins. It ends at the beginning, and it's almost like it's a very delicate structure. And it was like this huge mathematical equation of patterns in my head while I was writing it. And it was very exciting to write it that way. It also felt like a total high wire act. Like what is going to make the reader continue to read if it's not the story per se? Or is there another way of creating story and storytelling that pulls us out of the inexorable forward march of time? I mean, we live forward. I mean, at least we experience our lives
right
forward, but we don't, I think, actually live forward in our internal lives. We're dragging our pasts with us always. We're haunted by what has happened. We're imagining what will happen, and this feeling of sort of it all being spinning plates all the time. Everything, like that wonderful title of that wonderful film that recently came out.
Everything all at once. Everyone, everything all at once.
Yes. That when I saw that film, it felt like that was what I was attempting to do in Signal Fires. And I didn't find it scary once I understood it, or once I felt, who wouldn't want a crystal ball just for a moment? I mean, who hasn't wished for that? And I felt as the novelist that I got to give my readers a small, miniature crystal ball where we can glimpse, this, for example, Waldo, for example, who is my favorite character, and who
Waldo,
he's kind of a tortured middle schooler. I mean, he's brilliant and he's special and he's different, and no middle schooler wants to be special,
right,
or different. And it doesn't help either that his parents don't value specialness or difference. They want him to be quote unquote normal, which is not what he is. And so for me, it was very satisfying to be able to think, well, Waldo's going to grow up and he's going to be just fine. He's going to be 21 years old and this kind of, brilliant student of astronomy. And if we can just know that, then we can hang on.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I just got a shock hearing you say that. That's right. That's right. That's a gift to the reader.
That it felt like a gift to the reader. It felt like a gift to me as the writer.
Right.
There's a layer of the novel that takes place in 2020, but in terms of the number of pages that it takes up in the book, it's actually a very small number of pages. I didn't want to write a novel set in the pandemic. I didn't want to write a COVID novel, but I was very curious about how these characters would be living during that period of time. I mean, there's another character, Theo, who's a chef, and in Brooklyn. And I thought, what would Theo be doing in 2020 when the first wave is just decimating New York City? What would he be doing? He's someone for whom food is love. And I just found myself just so satisfied to be able to imagine each of their lives just as having a little window, just being able to have a glimpse and then return to the heart of the story.
I think that's brilliant, because a lot of times when I'm stuck, I will always ask myself, well, where are these characters in 20 years? Which is sort of the same. So I can envision what they're doing, and then I can backtrack to how they got from this state to that state. So that's genius advice. I want to talk about the time loops. Ben Wilf believes that we live in loops rather than one straight lines. That's pure quantum physics. And I think you and I talked about it before, where quantum physics, and this is all science, says that time is a man-made construct, that everything is really happening all at the same time, and time will eventually slow and stop. And coupled with the fact that all you have to do is observe something to change it, scientific fact, it changes everything that we think about time and the world and how we live. So I wanted to know, is this something, and I think I know the answer to this, do you think that this is something that you've always felt, or did this come out in the writing?
Mm.
And if so, what made you come to this revelation? Did something happen in your life, or
Mm.
was it just in your reading?
I think it is something that I've always felt and couldn't quite articulate. I did a great deal of reading about quantum physics, writing signal fires. Waldo is also very
He's interested in it.
he's very interested in it, and I don't know that Ben would be able to articulate what his beliefs are. When he has that passage where he's thinking about time existing in loops, I actually kept on thinking of Virginia Woolf as I was writing
Right,
the passage, because it's very a Woolfian philosophy.
right.
But I think that the years between when I first started writing the novel and when I finally was able to return to it, there was so much life lived in those years in my world. I mean, there was certainly just the sheer passage of time, but also I made the discovery that my dad had not been my biological father,
That's a
um,
big one.
and that I had a different biological father walking around the world who was a total stranger to me, and I was able to meet that person and see for the first time in my life actually like who and where I came from, genetically, biologically. And that experience and that journey taught me so much about something that I had already been thinking a great deal about, which is why are certain people important to us? When we meet them, why do we feel I know you? The people who brush past us on the street or in an elevator or in an airport, they might be profoundly connected to us in some way that we can't apprehend. And I believe that happens all the time. And we don't know it because we don't have that lens and we don't have that ability to see those loops of time. And then after the sort of seismic discovery about my dad, and I wrote Inheritance and realized just how much of a ripple effect my
Right.
experience then had in the world. And then my husband, Michael, was diagnosed with very serious cancer. And we went from living on one side of, the veil that separates the healthy from the ill and the lucky from the unlucky. And that stuff I've thought about, really all
Right.
my life.
Right.
And suddenly, in an instant, that was, our new reality for the better part of a year. And we were displaced. We weren't living in our home. We were living in an apartment in New York City on the 57th floor of a building, sort of like in the clouds, literally in the clouds. And he recovered, thank God. And then life returned to, a pace that we had previously been in. And then the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic hit us all, I think one of the common feelings that so many of us had was this realization that we're all connected. And,
Yes.
the interconnectedness and the interrelatedness and the, on a global level, on the we share this planet level, on the we are all human beings level, and our vulnerabilities and everything we do impacts everyone else. And I think that without all of that lived life, I would not have been able to return to Signal Fires with the capacity to enter the story in the way that I did. Or what I would say, Caroline, actually is I feel like I finally deserved those characters that I had created 15 years earlier. Like me, 15 years younger, actually couldn't meet them where they were. And there were things I didn't understand and things that I didn't know. And one of the incredibly mysterious things to me, if we want to talk about everything everywhere all at once, is that I created the character of Benjamin Wilf 15 years ago. It was only 6 years ago that I discovered that my father wasn't my biological father, and I met the man who is. And he is so much like Benjamin Wilf.
Wow.
That you can, when I returned to the book, and readers of Inheritance, which is my memoir about that experience, would probably think, oh, Dani must have created this character after meeting her biological father because they're so similar. They're both doctors. They both have the same medical specialty. They look alike. Their nature is very similar, very steady, very kind, very slightly they see everything and take in everything, but at the same time are a little bit reserved. There's so much about them that is so similar. And even in the writing, when I returned to it, I never thought about that, not once, because Benjamin Wilf was already Benjamin Wilf in my imagination. And it wasn't until I finished the novel and I gave it to my son for an early read. And he read the manuscript and he came into my office and he said, Mom, he's just like him.
It's a time loop. It's a time loop.
It's a time loop. I mean,
yeah.
That person already existed somewhere in my apprehension of the world, in some way, in my deep interior, he already existed, which of course makes a certain kind of strange sense because I actually share, a significant amount of DNA with him, but that's not all of it by any means. It's like, why, that will forever remain mysterious and wonderful to me that happened.
I thought it was mysterious and wonderful too. I want to talk about, I have so many questions. Okay, Sarah Ben's daughter. At one point, she's in midlife in the midst of an unsatisfying affair. The son, Theo, he does have a chef. He is a chef. He has a restaurant. But the thread that binds this whole family together is, I thought it was like one of pure loneliness, almost a lack of connection. Mimi, the mom, and you think of the mom as the center of the family, has vanished. The family is, you say, separate in a tattered universe. I found that incredibly moving. Would you say that in a way, that's all of us, that first, if we start with these small families and find what connects us, we can move on to the bigger families or, the family of man?
Such an interesting question. I mean, I see the secret that the Wilfs begin to keep starting on that night in 1985 where there's this accident involving the children. And it's an accident that has a tragic outcome for the friend of the teenagers who was in the car, and yet has no consequences, no visible consequences for the Wilf family. No one is blamed, no one is breathalyzed, no one is taken into custody, no one's reputation is damaged, really. And they have a sort of tacit, I can't even call it an agreement. It's like a choice that they all somehow make, that they will never speak of what happened that night ever again, not just in the outer world, but to each other. So within the walls of their home, there is a secret. And I think that the sort of the tattered universe that they live in, and that these teenagers grow up into adulthood in, and these parents who never speak of it again to each other or to their children, that is what creates the kind of loneliness that they live with. Because
Right.
when we don't speak of the hard things, when we don't speak of the true things about ourselves, we end up um, not not being known, not knowing ourselves, not feeling that there isn't the opportunity to know one another, and I think that that's what happens to them.
I want to remind everybody out there, if you have any questions for Dani, please pop them in the chat. We'll be taking them in about 7 minutes probably. Okay, so I want to talk more about secrets. Do you think that there's ever a secret that's worth keeping? Or do you think that it's better to live your life on the high wire and, let people know who you are and what you're thinking and what you're feeling?
I think, like so many profound questions, there isn't a hard and fast answer. Um, there are people who would say that secrets are always toxic and always should should come out in the open. I mean, I would say that I think it has to do with time and
Right.
when a secret is. I think I would agree that secrets should always eventually be kept. I mean, come out. But when they come out, can be either liberating or damaging, depending on. I mean, one of the revelations for me when I realized that my parents had kept a secret and taken it to the grave with them, that was such a massive secret that had to do with my very identity. At first, I was really I felt so betrayed. I mean, how could they have kept that secret from me? And then I thought about it, and I thought, if I had found that out, if they had told me when I was a teenager, say, I think it would have devastated me because no one told their kids about donor conception in those days.
Right.
Some people didn't tell their children that who were adopted that they were adopted. There was so much that was hidden, but in the donor conception world, no one told. So if my parents had told me at 14, say, I would have felt like a complete and total unicorn. I would have felt that I was the only person in the entire world with this story. I would have despaired at the idea that I could ever know more about the truth of my biological, history and identity. And I'm not sure I would have survived it. Given
Right.
my
That's right.
relationship with my dad, my relationship with my mom, which wasn't so great, to find out that my dad, who I adored, I think it just would have been way too much for me. If my mother had sprung it on me when I was 23, right after my dad died, it would have been way too much for me. I just
That's
lost my
right.
mother, and then I would have lost my
Lost them again.
man. And so I found out at the right time, when there was enough time to still be able to make sense of things and at a time where, in fact, finding out was enormously liberating for me in so many ways. So I think, both in terms of my podcast and all the conversations that I've had with people about their secrets, the philosophy that I've sort of arrived at is that when we find out a secret, or when we share a secret, is as important as what the secret is.
Yeah, that's profound, and I think you're exactly right. I want to talk about memory, because so much of the book is about memory. And time. You have Mimi, who's losing her faculties, and in a very dangerous, complex, and haunting way. You also have, Waldo, when he looks up at the stars. When you see the stars, they're not really there. They're already dead. You're seeing a memory of them across the light years. And I thought that was really great. And the thing about memory is that a lot of times the brain doesn't know the difference. Like if you were hypnotized and I told you, Dani, your head is on fire, your skin would blister. It just doesn't know the difference. So I would like to ask you, do you think that when we lose memory, what we're really losing is our bonds with others? And that's what's so frightening to us? We're losing the reality of what's happening here and now in the moment?
I think with Mimi, who is suffering from Alzheimer's, in 2010, when we really meet her. I mean, she makes an appearance in 1985, but we really get to know her in 2010 and then earlier. Um, what I felt about her mind was that time, she had lost all grasp and all grip of time as it relates to memory. But what she hadn't lost was the knowledge of who she loved. That without sounding sentimental about this, because I don't mean it in a sentimental way, I really, my mother-in-law suffered from Alzheimer's, and I remember when she was really pretty far gone, I went to visit her with my son, her grandson, one of her 6 grandchildren, and she hadn't seen him in quite some time, and she mixed everybody up and mixed everything up and had no idea what was happening to herself. She if she was in pain, she couldn't remember why she was in pain. I mean, it was just tragic watching her. But when she saw my son, she just looked at him and said, Kenahura, which for those of you who don't speak Yiddish is like, maybe like it's a blessing. It's may the evil eye protect you. It's a blessing. She knew she loved him. She might not have known his name. She might not have known which grandchild, but there was this fierce love. And I think with Mimi, there's this absolutely powerful sense of her love for her children and her love for her husband, even though it's all completely in a jumble of time in her mind.
Mimi, to my mind, Mimi also exemplified time shattering and coming together. She sees her children, what you wrote, all at once, which I loved. They're babies, they're grown-ups. It's all the same time. When I read that, again, it just reverberated inside of me because I'm always doing that. I'm
Yeah.
always like thinking of Max when he was 3, and I can feel him in my arms and I can smell him the way he smelled as a baby. And then the next moment he's an adult.
Yeah.
So I guess I just wanted to know, I'm sure that happens with you also, but do you find it comforting or confusing? Or now that you've written this book, you probably understand it better.
I find it, if there was a word, there should be a German word for this. If there was a word for like comforting meets bittersweet,
Yes.
and there probably is a German word for this. There's a
Yes.
German word for everything, but like comforting meets bittersweet is what it feels like. There's a pang, even though I don't want to go back there. I don't want to live that life all over again. Not exactly.
Don't you want just a minute of it though?
Yeah, I want.
Yeah.
Well, I think that to go back to the structure, right? It's that
Right. Right.
I want to let me have 5 minutes of holding the weight of that baby and smelling that head.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I have it because I can and you have it and we all have it. We can absolutely, my beloved Aunt Shirley, who's 97 years old, has this she has like 70 something great grandchildren. She has said to me, my life is a museum, and I can wander into the different rooms and into the different galleries. It struck me when she said that years ago as such a mark of a deeply satisfying life, to feel that, that she could wander into all the rooms and have that experience. And I think that's, in Mimi's case, that's what she does, except that there's one room she doesn't want to wander into because she doesn't want to go back to that night in 1985.
Right.
She's doing everything to, even in her, demented state, she's doing everything to defend herself against, oh, not there. I don't want to go there. Right. Let's go somewhere else. She feels the danger, the live wire of that.
You have an audience question. In some manner, forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Is revealing a secret something you do for yourself also? Oh,
Hmm,
that's an interesting question.
that is an interesting question. And it actually is a really interesting parallel to forgiveness because, forgiveness benefits the forgiver and the forgiven. Um, and I think that the revealing of a secret also um, needs to impact both the keeper of the secret and the people to whom that secret is being revealed. Um, if a secret is revealed because it's out of anger or out of spite or out of a kind of comeuppance, or then it's probably not doing anybody any good. Um, it's I think that process of like reaching that place where it needs to come out for the good of for the greater good, for the good of the person who's been keeping it and for the greater good.
Someone said in a review of your work that they felt you had become more and more profoundly spiritual. I think you've been spiritual since I first met you, but you would know the answer to this better than I would. Do you think this is true? And if so, does it surprise you?
Mm. I think that really beginning with devotion, with my memoir devotion, um, I entered another sort of state of living or state of being um, when I sort of opened the door to my own sense of the spiritual after having spent my early life in a very in a uh, in a mentality that was very strictly religious and was very very us and them is the way that I thought of it. And if it was us and them, then I was going to just opt out of that. I always, from the time I was a young child, felt like I don't want to live that way. I don't want there to be an us and a them. And writing devotion really profoundly changed the way that I came to understand how I wanted to live my life, in a not in a ritualized religious way, but in sort of in a way where spirituality kind of permeates everything. I do think that it's increasingly entered my work, and I think that that's what that reviewer who said that I loved reading that was a reviewer from the LA Times who said that Signal Fires was perhaps my most spiritual work. And I loved that because I took that as such a high compliment because so many of my preoccupations, my obsessions, my thinking about uh, grief and joy and time and loss and commitment and ethics, it all found its way into this novel, into this storytelling.
Okay, we have another audience question. What's the difference for you between writing fiction and nonfiction? Is there one you like better?
They feel really different. I mean, they feel different to me. When I'm writing memoir, um, as I'll often say to my students, you know the story. You already know the story. So if you know the story and you're writing a memoir, you kind of have the parameters. You're writing about
Right,
something that
right.
happened that you know about. So then what's the discovery in that? And what's the art in that? The art is, I think, in putting together what what belongs to what, making the associations, like sort of making sense of what happened, making meaning out of what happened. When you're writing fiction, as you well know, like the whole world is up for grabs. So, it's one of the things that's unbelievably challenging about beginning because it's everything. So it's then about kind of choosing a lane and saying
Right.
like, this is, and then maybe going pretty far down that lane and going, oh, no. Actually, it's this character in chapter 5 that this book is really about. So I have to start over, and then starting over. And then there's tremendous freedom in it that I missed terribly. But it feels different. It feels like I'm exercising a different set of muscles.
Okay, and I have one last question for you, which is for me. You said, which I loved, you're less interested now in playing it safe, which I think is something I love because, we're here in this moment. Why not just fiercely go for it?
Yeah.
So I wanted to know, are you still interested in that? And in little ways or major ways or how?
Oh, I love that question. I love thinking about that. There's nothing like watching your partner face a potentially terminal illness,
Right.
and to come out the other side, to really make one want to take the biggest bite out of life possible. And that means a lot of different things to me, from the large to the small. That I am 60 years old and that I'm taking creative risks that I have never taken before, trying new forms. Creating that podcast was liberating to me. I didn't know how to create a podcast. I barely even listened to podcasts. And then I created this podcast that became a hit and has helped hundreds of thousands of people. It's like safe to say. And I didn't listen to the voice in my head that says you can't do this. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, I adapted a novel. I adapted Sue Miller's novel, Monogamy, as a feature film, which is going actually very, very well at the moment. And I didn't listen to the voice in my head that said, you don't know how to do that. You've never done that before. And finally now, Signal Fires is being developed as a television series, and I'm supposed to write the pilot. And as I sit here with you right now, I will say, I have absolutely no idea how to do that. And that is exciting.
Yes.
It's terrifying, but it's also exciting. And then in the small ways, in the, like drink the good bottle of wine, use the olive oil. My husband and I, when we came back from our honeymoon in France, we brought back really special olive oil from Provence, and we saved that olive oil. We saved the olive oil for like 2 years because it's really special olive oil. So what happened? We opened the olive oil and it had gone rancid because we were saving it. I mean, in a way, I'm in a kind of save nothing.
Yes.
And it feels, I think perhaps the pandemic has taught us so much about how, and by save nothing, I don't mean like, go wild. I mean like just there's something that's joyful and exciting about like waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to go for it today. I'm going to honor the way that I want to live. I'm going to honor the way that I want to feel and honor what I hope I can create and the people that I love and the world around us, the wider world, and do what I can, because this day is precious. And I don't think I lived that way 20 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, but I am really consciously trying to live that way now.
I love that. I think everybody should live that way. So I want to show this gorgeous cover again, Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro. We have the link to bookshop.org right in the chat. And otherwise, you can walk down to your favorite bookstore and get it. Thank you all for being here and for listening. Remember, you can watch this again or tell your friends. They can see it on Mighty Blaze YouTube channel. I want to thank our wonderful producer and writer, Ollie Martin. And of course, I want to thank you, Dani. This was just a delight. You just inspire me. I mean, I feel like all these electric fireflies now.
Right back at you, Caroline. I love everything that you do in this world, and it's such a pleasure to be a part of a Mighty Blaze.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we'll see all of you later. Okay.